Hey, welcome everyone to tonight's Torah Fundamentals Zoom room, where Rabbi Juan Marcos Gutierrez is going to give us a great presentation on Lecha Dodi, a song sung on Shabbat, get into some great stuff. Just a couple brief announcements before we start. In 48 hours, right, we're going to have another Zoom room. It's one we've done twice before, so it's kind of an annual thing. We may do it more, but it's on dreams and spiritual phenomena. Things people have experienced. To come take the mic at a lecture. It's an open mic night, but try to keep it, we're trying to keep it spiritually oriented to share things. And if people are comfortable with answering questions, they can. They don't have to. It will not be recorded for privacy's sake. But we've had two before, and they were phenomenal nights. They were really wonderful. So please try to come this Saturday night, 9 o'clock, after most people Shabbat. We try to work it out that way. So that's this Saturday night. I'm rescheduling the Matrix Resurrections discussion and clips from the movie. I have a survey on that in that group to see if people want it on a Thursday or a Saturday night. So check that out. If you have any questions about any of these things, just contact me. And yeah, more good stuff in 2022. We got our ladies Neshot Binah room continuing, our meditation group continuing. So it's all wonderful stuff to help people get closer to Hashem. So having said all that, we'll conclude announcements. I'll hand it over to Rabbi Juan, and thank you all for being here.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for another opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Let me start off by saying that of all of the pieces in the liturgy and the Siddur, Lecha Dodi is probably one of my top 2 or top 3 favorites. It's such a beautiful song. And I think if you're not reciting, or if you're not familiar with the Kabbalat Shabbat and the Lecha Dodi, you're really missing something. Not just in terms of beauty, in terms of the words themselves, but the melodies that are available. I think there are probably more melodies for Lecha Dodi than any other song in the Siddur that I've come across. Maybe Adon Olam, of course, has many, but it's really an amazing piece of material. And we want to delve into a little bit of the history behind that. First of all, we're looking at a drawing of the Abu Chav synagogue in Safed, and there are many traditions regarding its construction. One of them, however, tells us that Rabbi Abu Chav was a Spanish exile. He was an exile from the Iberian Peninsula in 1492, of course, as we're going to see, because it's very much connected to the Lecha Dodi, I believe. The Jews of Iberia were transformed in something catastrophic. And so he and many of his disciples fled. They settled in Safed or Safat, and they established a synagogue. He was a Kabbalist, very important individual. And with that, we want to sort of set the stage, because the Lecha Dodi is not just a beautiful song. It's a song of redemption. It's a song of messianic expectation. It's a sign of hope and a song of the aspirations of the restoration of the people of Israel, of the end of the Galut. And I think that's probably the reason that I connect with that song so much. It just has so much in there that it's just an incredible piece in the liturgy. So the setting that we want to start off with, a little bit of history, is we want to briefly talk about Jews in the Iberian Peninsula. Now, we're not going to get into all the details, because, of course, that would be its own series of lectures. But suffice to say that at the end of the 14th century, there were a series of tragic circumstances that befell the Jewish communities of Castile and Aragon. Something like 80 different Jewish communities in those two kingdoms were attacked in 1391. Now, there had been turmoil before that. In fact, this depiction here, this painting that was done in the 19th century, is depicting the massacre at Toledo, the old capital of Castile. But the reality is that there was more than one massacre at Toledo. This is one of the tragedies. In 1391, however, things were set in motion that transformed the Jewish community, and these events would last 100 years. So there was a crisis in the Jewish communities of Castile and Aragon for the next 100 years. And of course, if you think about it, when does that end? It's in 1492, almost 101 years, if you want to look at it from that perspective. And it's something that we don't often think about the ramifications of, because we think, oh, okay, well, in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella issued this edict of expulsion, and we sort of go on to the next, historical event in the history of the Jewish people. But this is something that sets sort of a chain of events into effect, because Castile and Aragon have issued this edict, but there are other kingdoms in Spain, what we call Spain and Portugal. There's the Kingdom of Portugal. There's also the Kingdom of Navarra. And many Jews, as we will see, travel into Portugal as sort of the natural safe haven. Some of them go into North Africa, to Morocco, for example, and some of them will go eastward. They'll go into Italy, and then eventually they'll try to make it to the Ottoman Empire and to what we think of as the Balkan region, or the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, or in the Levant, where, of course, the land of Israel is located, Syria, Lebanon, those countries today. But what happens in Portugal is that we have another situation. We have another expulsion decree that's issued in 1497. And then finally, in Navarra, in the very small kingdom of Navarra, in the very north part of Spain, or present-day Spain, there's another edict that's issued in 1498. So wherever these individuals turn, it seems like the doors have been closed. And one of the things that we have to understand is that the effects of the exile, if you want to think about it that way, it's an exile within an exile, are tremendous. Why? Because Jewish life in the Iberian Peninsula had lasted for more than 1,000 years. The earliest record, the archaeological record of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula, stems from about the second and third centuries of the Common Era, during the Roman period. Now, it's likely that Jews lived there before, but simply for the sake of having something concrete, we know that there were Jews there in the early Roman period, and so, or in Roman antiquity. And so think about it: Jews had lived there at the time continuously longer than they had lived in the land of Israel. If you want to take into account the destruction of the first temple and so forth, it's a tremendous amount of Jewish life that was invested in this peninsula, and it was the largest Jewish community, if you want to take into account Portugal, Castile, Aragon, and Navarra, in Europe at the time. Hundreds of thousands of Jews who had become part of this very diverse culture. Of course, you had Islamic periods, you had Christian periods, you had Jews. And then during that period of 100 years of crisis, you had the creation of another group of individuals, those individuals who were forced to convert in 1391, and then in successive ways thereafter, in 1412 to 1415, then again in the 1420s. All these catastrophes and tragedies occurred at this period of time, and they created a class of individuals that we know as conversos, or in Hebrew, we would use the term anusim, or bnei anusim. So essentially, you have four groups of people. You have Christians, you have Muslims, you have Jews, and then you have this fourth class that has been in many ways dispossessed. And their identity is in flux, because on the one hand, they're legally Christian, but on the other hand, they are, of course, Jewish. They live in the same neighborhoods, they eat the same foods, they have family members, and some of them are very committed to living out this life secretly. And of course, this is where the story of the Inquisition comes in. We're not going to go into all the details, but the reason that I put this out there is because I think it's critical for us to understand what the Lecha Dodi is trying to convey, and what the individuals, Shlomo Alkabetz, but also the people around him are in many ways dealing with, and the ramifications that they are dealing with a generation, 2 generations after the fact. So we look at this map, we can see, of course, this is a modern day depiction, but as I noted, there are several kingdoms there. The expulsion happens. Some Jews go to Portugal, some try to make it north. That's over a very long period of time. It's not something that happens instantaneously. It actually happens over several centuries. Some of them go to North Africa, but as you can see, some of them begin to move eastward. They go to Italy, and then they eventually make it to the Balkan regions. And you can see, in fact, that some of them will actually make it into what we would normally consider to be the lands of Ashkenaz, Central Europe, and of course, Eastern Europe and Krakow, and also in Vienna and so forth. But the heart of the Ottoman Empire becomes the safe haven for many of these Iberian refugees. And in fact, hundreds of years later, we're talking about, the expulsions happened at the end of the 15th century. We're talking about in the 1500s and the 1600s, and thereafter, there will be individuals of these Bene Anusim, these conversos, who will travel to Italy. They'll travel to the northern parts of Europe. They'll travel to the Ottoman Empire, and they will return and rejoin the Jewish community. Now, the reason that's important is because now we're going to look at the individuals who we're going to set a little bit of a background for Lecha Dodi, but we're going to look at the individuals that form this circle of Kabbalists in Safat or Safed. So here, just some technical aspects. There's something called the Kabbalat Shabbat. If you're not familiar with that, we have the Siddur, we have a prayer book, and we have 3 daily services. We have Shacharit, which is the morning service. We pray that at Shachar, means dawn. Mincha is the afternoon service. And then in the evening, we have something called Ma'ariv or Arbit. Sephardic circles generally refer to it as Arbit, and Ashkenazic circles will often refer to it as Ma'ariv. They both refer to the same thing, to the evening. And so the Kabbalat Shabbat was added as a precursor on Friday nights to what? To welcome the Shabbat, to receive Kabbalah, to receive the Shabbat. And traditionally, there's some different elements depending on the minchag or the nusach, but generally it consists of a series of psalms, Psalms 95 through 99, and then also some Psalm 29, and then sort of the high point of it is Lecha Dodi, and then afterwards traditionally Psalm 92 and Psalm 93 are recited or chanted, and Psalm 92 is important because this is happening, generally, traditionally, the men would be in the shul or the Beit Knesset in the synagogue, and the wives would be at home. They had lit the Shabbat candles. The men would be welcoming in Shabbat, and when they recite Psalm 92, then they have accepted Shabbat upon themselves. So this is sort of the flow. This is where Lecha Dodi is found, and so I wanted to give you just that little bit of context to understand. Now let's look at the rabbis that I've been talking about. And many of these individuals, of course, you will know. And there are many more other rabbis that we could mention, but we'll keep it to these for now. So we have Rabbi Moses Cordovero. Now, immediately from his name, you can already see sort of the connection. He's known as the Ramak. He was born in 1522 and he died in 1570. And as you can tell from his name, his family was originally from Cordoba. It was the heart of the southern part of Spain, Andalusia, which was, of course, the last stronghold. Granada, that region was the last Muslim stronghold that continued until 1492. He was of, you could say, the second generation of the exiles, because his family departed and then he was born after. But the memory of that was very strong. And he's very important to us because he was a very well-known Kabbalist, but he was also the brother-in-law of the individual who wrote the Lecha Dodi, of Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. So this Rabbi Moses Cordovero, this is the circle of individuals. The other individual who is extremely important is Rabbi Joseph Caro. Caro was born in 1488, and he is known as the Maran. The Maran is our teacher. He's sort of the great teacher. Why? And he's also known as the Mechaber. The Mechaber is the author. Why is he known as the teacher? He's known for this because of the fact that he authored the Shulchan Aruch and the Beit Yosef actually first as a commentary on the Torah, and then the Shulchan Aruch is sort of the condensed version of the Beit Yosef, and the Shulchan Aruch is essentially a code of Jewish law. What Joseph Caro did is he looked back centuries before. He looked at the Rambam, he looked at the Rif, he looked at the Rosh, and he said, we need to do something about Jewish law because we've had catastrophes happen. We've had the exiles. We have, Jewish education is not at the state that it should be. And in order to preserve the law for the future, we need to give people very clear instructions on what the law should be, on what halakha should be. So he looks to these individuals, the ones that I mentioned, and when two of them are in agreement on a particular topic, he will sort of side with them. So he'll look to the Rambam, of course, in the Mishneh Torah. He'll look to the Rif, Rabbi Alfasi, and then and the Rosh. And then what he will do is he'll put these together, and he will put these in the Shulchan Aruch, the prepared table, this is the code of Jewish law, and all subsequent codes of Jewish law, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Mishnah Berurah, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, all these codes are ultimately derived from the Shulchan Aruch. Even Rabbi Moses Isserles, the Rema, provides like an Ashkenazic overlap, or like a tablecloth, if you will. He calls something called the Mappa, which gives like annotations and explanations for what is in many ways seen as sort of a Sephardic work, but it's so impactful, excuse me, that Rabbi Moses Isserles from Krakow, sort of adopts it and modifies it for the sake of Ashkenazic Jewry. Now, he was actually born in Toledo. So you can see again the link. He is a living link to the generation of the expulsion. So this is very important as well. And then, of course, the third one, these are all, great individuals. This is Rabbi Isaac Luria. Lived a very short life, 1534 to 1572. He's known as the Arizal. He's known as Ha'ari, sort of repetition there. And he's known, of course, most prominently for his system that we call Lurianic Kabbalah. Now, whether you believe that it's something that is ancient or goes back, he is the one that articulates it and puts it together. And many of the concepts of Lurianic Kabbalah, I think, are clearly tied to the issue of redemption, the end of the Galut, and I believe ultimately stem from the impact and the severity of the expulsion from Spain, from Portugal. All these things that have happened have really initiated a fervor, because the world in many ways has been shaken. These individuals are living in the East, but they have in essence heard the reverberations from the West. And this is so catastrophic. If you think about it, if we were to face something like this in the United States, because in that way, I think it's better for us to understand that Spain or the Iberian Peninsula would have been like, the United States today. We think about American Jewry in the United States, but in the medieval period, if there was anything close to it, where Jews were very much integrated into society. They represented significant numbers. They were very influential in certain quarters. They were very diversified in their livelihoods. You could find farmers, you could find peddlers, you could find tailors, you could find courtiers and financiers. Very broad Jewish community. It would have been the Iberian Peninsula. And in that sense, think about if Jews in America were to undergo that. It would be that catastrophic and that severe that the theological implications of that, I think, would be, wrestled with for quite some time. Another individual that's important is Rabbi Heim Vital. He was born in 1542, and he continued in 1620, so he lived a long life. He was a student of Rabbi Cordovero and of Rabbi Caro. He was also a student of Rabbi Ashlich, who was born in Adrianople. Now, Adrianople is one of these key cities of the Ottoman Empire. The reason that I mention it is because this is one of the cities in which many of the Iberian exiles will go and settle. Many of the great Ladino-speaking communities, Judesmo, what we call the Yiddish of Sephardim, if you will, among Iberian Jews, are in this Balkan region. And this is the area where many of these individuals settle in the Eastern diaspora. And it's also very important in the 17th century, because this is where one of the key sites that supports the rise of Shabbatai Zvi, or Shabbatai Zevi, or however you want to pronounce it. So there's a lot of messianic expectation in these areas, again, that I think is fueled by the past. He was also a student of Rabbi Caro. So Rabbi Caro in many ways is the halachist. He is the one that is providing the structure of Jewish law to many of these individuals. He's of the older generation. And of course, these individuals are all very much Kabbalists. They're all mystics. Now, the last individual that we want to mention, and let me sort of put my screen over here, is Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, who, of course, is the author of the Lecha Dodi. Now, he's born in 1500 and he lives until 1576. He studied with Rabbi Joseph Tait excuse me, I got a little bit of an issue with speaking today. Tait Datzak, and this rabbi was born in the Iberian Peninsula, and he left again during the expulsion, and he settled in another great city, or at least a city that would become a great Sephardic city, Salonika. And Salonika, just as a point of historical note, is very famous because it was a city that was tragically affected in the Second World War. Of course, it's in Greece, and something like 70 to 80,000 Sephardim lived there, and they, until the 1940s, they spoke Judaismo, they spoke Ladino, they spoke Judeo-Spanish. That, of course, trace back to the time of the expulsion. And that community, along with other communities in Greece and in Bulgaria and in the Balkan area, were impacted tragically by the occupying German forces. They were taken to the camps as well. And so there, I think most people don't know that Sephardic, if you want to say Spanish Jews, Portuguese Jews, they also suffered, not to the extent, of course, that Russian Jews or Polish Jews or German Jews did, but they were also represented in the tragedy of the Shoah. And of course, as I've mentioned, he is the author of the Lecha Dodi. Now, let's continue here. Let's get to the next slide. Now, let's look at some key facts about of the Lecha Dodi. And then after this, we're going to look at actually, we're going to sing the Lecha Dodi. I picked one melody, which I think is very beautiful. And then we're going to look at the English translation. So I mentioned in the very beginning that it was part of the Kabbalat Shabbat. It was written sometime, well, there's two dates that are given. One is either in 1529 or 1571. Some people have argued that it was written as like a wedding present. In many cultures, a poet would be commissioned to write a poem or a song in honor of a particular event. It's interesting because this is a common belief, although some sources don't actually confirm that. So I'm unclear as to whether that's the case or it's sort of developed as a legend because of the imagery that's included in the song itself. Now, the title is taken from Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 12. And it's inspired by the Bavli, by the Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat 19a, when the rabbis would say, "Come, let us go out to welcome the Sabbath queen," or "Come, O bride, come, O bride." And so the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, tells us that the rabbis would dress in their finest, and they would go out into the fields, and they would welcome the Shabbat. And it's generally recited responsively. Depends on the particular custom. Some, it has a refrain, Lecha Dodi, what we'll see, Lecha Dodi. Some people do that sort of in between the verses, as we'll see. Some people just sort of recite it. Many Sephardim just recite it straight through. Depends on the custom and the particular community. Now, at the very end, there's a section that says, Boi v'shalom, come in peace. And it's customary for everybody. This is prayed in the synagogue, recited in the synagogue. Everybody rises and they face the entrance of the shul to greet, I should say greet, not great, the Sabbath bride. And it's because the idea is that the Shekhinah accompanies the Sabbath. Now, it's interesting because this process of turning to the door is also connected in a sense to the memory of the Beit HaMikdash that was built by Solomon, by Shlomo HaMelech. It's said that the Beit HaMikdash during his time had two gates, and one was for bridegrooms and one was for mourners. And the purpose of knowing, how people came in was that if you had a mourner come in, you would be, discreet, you would be appropriate, and you would know that this person is in suffering. And of course, you would modify your behavior accordingly if you were to go near them. Now, it's interesting because many Sephardim, especially Syrian, only recite a condensed version of the Lecha Dodi. And it's the part that spells out the name Shlomo. Because what you'll notice is that he has Shlomo Halevi, because the first letter of every stanza or of every verse begins with the letter that spells out his name, Shlomo Halevi. So it's interesting. And the reason that Syrian Jews, which are one of the four groups that we put under the category of Sephardic Jews, Moroccan, Turkish, Judeo-Spanish, and the Spanish-Portuguese, and Syrian, the reason that they do that is because they don't want Shabbat to be connected to mourning. Because in the song itself, as we'll see, there's an element of mourning, but then of course there's the element of redemption. And so for whatever reason, the Syrians chose to do like a condensed version, which is common in many circles. Okay, now before we get to the text, I wanted to share this with you. This is from Bereshit Rabbah, from the Midrash, and we read the following. This is Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, or Simeon bar Yochai as well. The Sabbath spoke to the Holy One, Master of the universe. Each one of the days has a mate, but I have no mate. The Holy One replied, the congregation of Israel will be your mate. And when Israel stood before Mount Sinai, the Holy One said to them, remember the special thing I told the Sabbath, that the congregation of Israel is to be your mate. It is this that is implied in the verse, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. And of course, you can see, we talked about the idea of welcoming the bride, welcoming the Sabbath queen. Here we have this idea that the Sabbath, Shabbat, is wedded to the people of Israel. Now, let's look at the text. And before we do that, I'm gonna give you sort of a precursor. It's a little bit technical, but I thought it was interesting. There's something that happens quite often in the liturgy. Oftentimes, the liturgy is often developed. I mean, the words themselves are developed by, of course, different sages, poets, someone like Shlomo Ibn Gabirol, etc. But the tunes themselves are very fluid. They often reflect the environment in which a particular community is found. That's why, of course, if you go to a community in Hungary or Hungary or Eastern Europe, the tunes tend to reflect that type of musical tradition. If you go to Italy and you know about Solomon Darasi and the tradition, the music there is in many ways very choral, very you could say almost operatic. I think, it's not the technical term to use, but it reflects the elements that are in play at that time. And you can do the same in North Africa. You can do the same in the Middle East. And so there's something called a contrafacta or a contrafactum. And what that means is that popular songs were often attractive to the Jewish community. They would hear these songs and they would say, oh, that's a beautiful tune. What can we do to, if you will, sanctify that tune? Well, they would take that tune and then they would substitute the lyrics from the Siddur, from the Tefillot, and put them together. So, for example, if you're familiar, if you've ever heard me sing Psalm 23, Mizmor LeDavid, we have a tune. It says, Mizmor LeDavid Adonai Roi Lo Exile. And you can tell, I don't have to sing the whole thing, but that song is actually a bar song as well. And it's reflective of the Balkan region. And it's a very melodic, very beautiful song, but it's a contrafacta. It was taken in, and it's sung as a secular tune by Sephardim, but it's also sung in the synagogue for Psalm 23. And my family sings that, for our Psalm 23. And so this particular version of the Lecha Dodi that I'm going to sing for you is a contrafacta. And it was, the original lyrics were written by a gentleman by the name of Yaakov Orland. And the music was by Yedidia Admon, who was a very famous musician in the first part of the 20th century in the land of Israel. And it's based on a Bukharan melody. Now, it's interesting because I, to be quite honest, always thought it was a Moroccan melody because I got it from a Moroccan source. So you can see sort of the interplay of traditions and how they spread and how one tune sort of winds up in a different area So it's just an interesting aspect of Jewish life and Jewish culture. And it's the song that we sing. This is the one that we sing in my family because it's just a beautiful tune. We do know many others. We know Spanish, Portuguese ones, not in Spanish, but the style. We know several other Sephardic tunes that we sing, and of course several Ashkenazic tunes as well. But I wanted to sing this first for you because it's such a beautiful tune, and then we're going to look at the translation. So what happens is, this is the chorus, the first part, Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. And so this comes in between each stanza. I just put it there for simplicity, but we're going to go, we'll do the first part, and we'll go back and we'll sing the rest. And I think you'll get the hang of it. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Shamo v'zacho b'dibur echad, ishmi'anu el hamyuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad, L'shem ultiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki hi mekor haberacha. Merosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh mechashavat tehila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech ir melucha, kumitzi mitoch Achavecha, Rav lach shevet be'emek habacha, vehu yachamol alaychem la. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Hidna ari me'afar kumihi, Lishvi bigdei tiv'artech amihi, Alya ben Yishai be'halachmi, Garba el nafshi gala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Hitori, kiva orech, kumi ori, uri, shidaberi, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat lekabela. Lo tevoshi velo tikalmi, matishtochachi umatechemi, bach yechesu anayi ami, veni netai atila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. V'chayulim shisas shosayich, v'rachaku kome balayich, yasis alayich Elohai kimos chatan al kala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Yaminu smol tivorotzi vet Adonai ta'aritzi al yad ish ben parzi v'nismecha v'nagila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pene Shabbat nekabela, Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pene Shabbat nekabela. Now at this stage, in the last line, people would, rise and they would turn to the door. Boyi b'shalom ateret bala, ga b'simcha u'tzchala toch emune am segula, boyi chala. And then in the Sephardic tradition, this is actually sort of a generic text. In the Sephardic tradition, it ends a little bit differently. And then I'll just do that for you, and then we'll go into the translation. Toch emune am segula, boyi chala, toch emune am segula, boyi chala, Shabbat malketam. Now just imagine you're singing that song in the field. Just imagine the sense of that, the beauty, and the idea of welcoming in the Shekhinah and the Sabbath, because they're interrelated, and the welcoming in the presence and the beauty of Shabbat. Now, this translation is sort of a little bit, you could say sort of liberal, but I think it's still sort of helpful, for us to look at it. It's still pretty close. The way they translate it here is, go forth, my beloved, to meet the bride. Shabbat's reception has arrived. Or many Sidurs put it, let us welcome the Shabbat. And then we saw the first part, Shamor. I'm looking at Sidur here, so I can look at the Hebrew and also look at the English text. Shamor bezachor bedibur echad. Observe and remember two words as one. These are the two words that were spoken, proclaimed by the only, forgotten by none. Adonai is one. Adonai echad ushmo echad, and his name is one. Praised and renowned and glorified. Now, what is important about Adonai is one and his name is one. If you remember the Aleinu, what do we talk about? On that day, he will be one, and he and his name will be one. There's a sense that when Hashem establishes the Messianic kingdom, that all, idolatry will be destroyed. All these things will, the nations, the Goyim will recognize that Hashem is one. And we have that element here in the Lecha Dodi. To meet Shabbat, let us go, for she is the source from which blessings now flow. It should be flow. From creation's beginning, a royal veiled glow. The last, though created, the first sanctified. And that's where the part we read, Leshem utiferet velitchila. I'm sort of looking here. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Trying to get my page here correctly. And then it says, Mikdash Melech, Ir Melucha, Kumitzi Mitoch Habecha, regal city, the king's holy shrine, rise up and leave your upheaval behind. It's talking about Jerusalem, the destruction. Just imagine these individuals, the circle of the Kabbalists that had come to Safat. They had come there. And of course, they don't go to Jerusalem. There are some Jews there, but Jerusalem is only a shadow of what it once was. And so there's a sorrow mixed in with being in the land of Israel. There's sort of a bittersweet element to it. And what does it say? It says, too long in the valley of Hears, be'emek habacha, have you pined? The compassionate one will compassion provide. And then we continue, and it says, hit na'arim afar kumi, Lishve bigde tifartech ami al yad ben Yishai bet halachmi karba el nafshi ga'ala. Shake off the ashes, rise up for them. Stop mourning, rise up from them. Wear glorious clothes, my people, my gem. Because why? Because it's talking about Mashiach. It's talking about the son of Yishai, the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite of Bethlehem, will redeem my soul, draw near to my side. So there's a longing for the Messianic redemption, the end of the Galut, the restoration of the Davidic kingdom. And it continues when it says, hit orori, awake, awake, your light is here. Kiva orech, kumi ori, shine and behold, bold and clear. Wake up, wake up. It's this longing inside, has to be stirred up. and Shabbat is the vehicle in part to stir the heart, to sense, as we talked about in the last class, me'en olam haba, a taste of the world to come, a semblance, a little bit of an inkling of what the redemption will be like, right? Because we don't experience the same things on Shabbat that we do. We don't have to work. We don't have to worry. We eat food. We rejoice. We sing songs that draw near the presence of Hashem, sing verses to hear through you the presence of God comes alive. Be not despondent, be not cast down. Why be dejected? Why face the ground? In a city rebuilt, let's see here, on its own ancient mound, the poor of my people find shelter in sign. And it says, Anaye ami, the downtrodden of my people, the Niv neta ir al tila, and the city shall rebuild on its ruins. So of course, this one is like a little bit more poetic translation. Shunned are all who would shun you. Gone are all those who would overrun you. The joy of your God shines upon you, like the joy of a groom and a bride. Now, if you, as most of you know, I'm not really a Kabbalist. Of course, I mean, I have great love for the Lecha Dodi and many of the Chachamim, but it's, there's just, it's not my area of study. There's a lot of other things that I study, but you can see, if you're familiar with Kabbalistic imagery and some of the aspects of intimacy, you can see these elements in the Lecha Dodi. There's a union that takes place, and you can obviously, Toby has a lot of material on the Sefirot and a lot of the dynamics that happen in between that, or in the scheme of the Sefirot. But you can see that imagery here because the union between man and wife is reflected in the union between Shabbat, between Israel and Hashem. And then it says, spread out to the left and to the right, Yaminu Musmol, proclaim the Holy One's might, El revel in our delight through again, who? Peretz son, who is this? Peretz is one of the forebears, right, in the book of Genesis. Through his line, this is still this line of will ultimately come, the people of Israel, come forth in peace, your husband's pride, joyful, happy, gratified, into the midst of the faithful tribe, come forth bride, come forth bride. Now, in the Sephardic version, let me read the last part to you. So it says, break forth right and left, Yaminu Smol, Tifortzi, Ve'et Adonai, Ta'aritzi, Al Yad Ish Ben Partzi. So one of the things that they don't put here in the Hebrew, Al Yad, through the hand of the man descended, the son of Peretz. This is going to happen, V'nismecha v'nagilah, then we will rejoice. So when we see this descendant of Peretz, come about, this is one of the names for Mashiach, the son of David, because he's a descendant of Boaz, who in turn is a descendant of Peretz. And so in the Sephardic custom, we say, come in peace, O crown of her husband, also enjoy song and jubilation among the faithful of the chosen people. Toch emunei am segula. Segula is that treasure, that treasured people. And then it says, Boyi chala, we bow traditionally, come, O bride, toch emunei am segula, among the faithful of the chosen people. The synagogue, the people that are there davening, they're welcoming the bride into the midst because they're going to rejoice in this wedding that is going to take place. And in the Sephardic tradition, it says, Boi chala Shabbat malketa. Come, O bride, the Sabbath queen, the Shabbat queen. So that ending is different from what is typically found in Ashkenazic Sidurim. Slight variation, but the rest of it is for the most part the same. And as I mentioned, let's go back very quickly. If you look here, these parts of the verses that I have in bold, if you can read it, it says the first part would be Shlomo, Shin, Lamed, Mem, Hey. Somebody's got out again, I guess, iPad. And then if you read the first part, it's a Hey, a Lamed, a Vav, and a Yud, Halevi. So this is the name, he put his name into it. And of course, as I mentioned, once the Lecha Dodi ends, it's sort of a beautiful transition because the psalm that follows that is Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat, which is Psalm 92. And it's just it's a psalm for the Shabbat day. It's like Lecha Dodi has been the entry point, and then Psalm 92 as it brings in Shabbat, it establishes it, and we are in the midst of Shabbat, and now we've accepted Shabbat upon ourselves in the same way that if our wives are at home lighting the Shabbat candles, of course, when they light the candles, they've accepted Shabbat on themselves. We are doing the same thing, but it's this beautiful imagery of the people of Israel and Shabbat, and the presence of Hashem, the Shekhinah is in the midst of them, and it's a communal experience. This is one of the reasons that I always emphasize the importance of community. I know that that's not feasible for everybody. That's why we have these online type of programs and lectures. But these things can only be, I think, maximized or truly experienced at their whole or at their most when there's a group of people singing. We have a sort of a joke, I think you could say, in Sephardic circles. It depends on the circles. In Ashkenazic circles, you may have a chazan, a cantor who is sort of the focal point of the service. Many Sephardic circles, everybody is singing together, sometimes competing with a chazan, sometimes they're off key, sometimes they're, going through it at their own pace. But there's this kind of communal experience. And when you see the Lecha Dodi sung in that environment, it's something that's invigorating. It's something that I think is it's a very spiritual and beautiful experience that I can only encourage all of you to incorporate into your lives. And if you're not able to daven with other people, put it into your practice to recite this song. It's a beautiful song. It's just so meaningful on so many levels. It talks about Mashiach, it talks about the Galut, it talks about intimacy, devikut. It doesn't use that term, but it's devikut, that cleaving to Hashem, right? And longing for the redemption of Israel. And then one thing I wanted to add here, if you didn't understand the text, in other classes I've gone sort of word by word. I thought maybe that was a little bit taxing for people. I think it's educational. I think it's helpful. I do like to do that because I think it sort of encourages people to really pick up and work with the Hebrew. But I wanted to show you one last thing. I put it in here sort of humorously, but also just I wanted to recommend also the Encyclopedia of Jewish Prayer by Macy Nolman. It's not available in print, but you can find it used. And then what I wanted to show you, which is something here, I shared this on Facebook. These are two of my three sons, and this is an amud, the stand that my father made for me. And he designed it so that I could sit down and daven. Then, of course, when it's time to stand up, I would stand. I can move it. But this is Yonadav, and he knows what to do. He's only two. He doesn't know all the words, but he sings as he can. And I want to encourage you: study, put it into practice. Make it something that is real, not just theoretical. Make it part of your experience. For him, he has that advantage, right? He has it at home, and know that not everybody has that, but it's something that everybody can connect to at their own level and at their own pace. But the main thing is to continue and to work at that. So with that, I'll stop and I'll open it up for any questions or comments that anybody might have. Well, Milton said that all of the Mekubalim in Safat were Sephardim. I think actually Isaac Luria was not, as far as I understand. I believe Shlomo Alkabetz was half and half. I think his mother was Sephardic and his father was Ashkenazic, as far as I understand. And Luria, I think, is most definitely Ashkenazic, as far as I understand. But it is interesting because his education is certainly, Sephardic. You saw Joseph Caro, you saw all these individuals, Moses Cordovero. The influence of Spain is all there. And I think that that's something that's very key. Somebody says, what is the reason that Sephardim face the opposite direction of the Ashkenaz during Mezmor David? That's interesting. I don't know. I didn't know that Ashkenazim did that. So that's actually new for me. I do have Ashkenazic friends, I have to say, but they usually do what we're doing. So sometimes, those customs might, be lost. So that's interesting. I'll have to look that up. Any other comments? Tovia says we should all move to Safat. Be beautiful. And of course, in many customs, Shir HaShirim has also been added as a precursor to the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat as well. That's, I know it's difficult, on a practical level, but sometimes it's difficult for people to set aside that amount of time. But again, it's a beautiful experience if you ever get to see it. One of the most beautiful things I saw many years ago at Young Israel was a 7 or 8 year old boy about the age of my son Yaron singing Shir HaShirim. And it's just something, impactful to see that and very stirring. And I think, in keeping with Milton's comment, I think it's interesting that, this Hasidim, of course, are very much impacted by Lurianic Kabbalah. And that's just why one of the reasons that we have these Eastern Hasidic rites that, if you notice in the art scroll, there's the Sephard rite. And if you ever picked it up and you thought it was Sephardic, it's not really Sephardic, but it's very close. It's this Eastern Polish Hasidic rite. And the reason that there's so much similarity between the two Sidurs, let me get something real quick, just a second. He was knocking at the door and crying and screaming, so I had to bring him in for a cameo. So this is Yonadav Amiel. And the reason that we have this similarity in the Eastern Hasidic rite is because indeed it's based upon the influence of Lurianic Kabbalah. And of course, this is why Kabbalists and Sephardim sort of get, along with each other, I think in many ways. But this is one explanation for some of the similarities. And of course, the other one had the two. I don't know about the third one will come, but I don't know if we have any other comments. We have some new messages here. What is the basic difference? Let's see. What is the basic difference? I can't see the entire question. I'm sorry. Can somebody read that to me? Tovia, could you read that last comment about the Sephardic?
What is the basic and advanced difference between Sephardic and Ashkenaz? But things you could address there. Some, I don't know if there's another context specific.
Well, very, very. I mean, generally, of course, you have two different ethno-cultural groups in play. I mean, obviously, they're both Jewish. But Sephardim, of course, are from Western Europe, North Africa, and the Levant. And if you want to be very specific, I mean, there's really only 4 Sephardic groups. We tend to use the word Sephardic to sort of put an umbrella on everything, Mizrahi groups. But there's really only 4 Sephardic groups: the Spanish Portuguese, what we call the Judeo-Spanish or the Turkish Jews, the ones that we talked about and settled in the Ottoman Empire. And then the Moroccans, because they're very heavily influenced by the Spanish exiles that came to North Africa. And because of course, they follow the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. And then of course, the Syrians, because there's a mixing there of Spanish exiles, but also of indigenous Syrian Lebanese Jews in that area. And they sort of hold, the right to say that they're the 4 Sephardic groups. And they all, of course, ultimately follow the Shulchan Aruch. So that is a tremendous point of commonality. Ashkenazim were influenced by the Shulchan Aruch. They do follow it as a basis of halakha, but they developed many other codes after the fact. And of course, it's a Central and Eastern European ethno-religious cultural context. So there are many differences, right? From language to elements of Hebrew pronunciation, to the history is different. And of course, there's always a cross influence that happened. As you saw in one of the early maps that I showed, there were Sephardic Jews from Spain who made it into what we would traditionally classify as Ashkenaz, lands of Ashkenaz. I mean, technically Ashkenaz should be northern France and Germany, but we sort of use that term again liberally to apply to Central and Eastern Europe. But I've met people before that they Ashkenazic and they do some kind of lineage or examination, and it turns out that they were actually exiles from Spain. In fact, there's one in El Paso, Texas. His name is Stephen de Leon, and he was from Poland. And one of the reasons that he works with Anusim, with the descendants of these forced converts, is because he said, I always wondered, I was Ashkenazic, but I had the name de Leon. Of course, like Moshe de Leon. And so he did some research and he found out that, of course, his family was sort of a transplant during the period of the expulsion. Let me see if I can get to the other question here.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Is all of this imaginary about the wedding? What?
Is it imaginary? I'm sorry?
Yes. All of these figures about the marriage between Israel and another entity, meaning God or the Shabbat, could be also related with the tefillin as well, because when we do the tefillin shel Yad, we say like Azacharti li leolam, etc. And then in Shabbat, when we don't do that, we sing this Lecha Dodi that has this imaginary about the marriage with Israel as well.
Yes, I think it's very much connected. It's in the tie-in, of course, is Shir HaShirim, where you have that imagery of Israel and Hashem. And so the tefillin, of course, are another element of that, the level of intimacy, the verse that you recite when you're winding around the finger. So yes, I would completely agree. It's all interconnected, this closeness, right? This connection between Hashem and the people of Israel, Devikut, is something that is very strongly expressed. Luke said that he feels a connection between heart and mind, and the Lecha Dodi. I agree. I think it's just something profound to it. I think in many ways, because there's the element of sorrow and there's also the element of hope and aspiration. And I think that in many ways, I disagree with the Syrians because, they eliminated that. I understand why, but there's sort of a complete aspect to it, singing the elements of what is real, and then knowing that Hashem will somehow bring about this restoration. To me, it just makes the song and the choreography of standing up and turning and bowing. It's just an experience that in many ways, I agree. It's very unique. There are certain other prayers that I feel that kind of connection to, but Lecha Dodi is definitely one that I think stirs the heart and can stir the emotions. And then somebody said something about Texas. I'm not sure. Is there any religious conflict in between Sephardi and Ashkenazic? Yes, I mean there are conflict between the two. I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, we could have a history class on that, and it's very complicated. There are very divergent lifestyles and philosophies, I should say, in part because of the influences. Sephardic Jews, whether they were in Spain or North Africa, or if you want to include Mizrahi Jews, they were impacted by Islam and Arabic culture. And in many ways, of course, in Spain, they were Arabized in many ways. 800 years of Arabic rule or Muslim rule, Moorish, Berber, however you want to explain that. That's a tremendous impact. It influences the way we think, the way we eat, the way we identify. Of course, there was the Christian element there as well. But in contrast to Central and Eastern Europe, Jews were the only minority group. So they were very heavily influenced by that experience. They were in many ways more closed, than the Sephardic Jews were. Sephardic Jews had at many times it changed during times of persecution, but they lived in a more open and fluid society. And one reason, because they were not the only minority. When Muslims were dominant, there were always Christians who were the other minority group along with Jews. And then when Christians became dominant, there were Muslims and there were also Jews. And of course, that was always advantageous because you're not the focus or the target necessarily. At times they were, but North Africa was much more complicated in terms of the dynamic between different types of Christians. And if you go farther east, of course, into the Middle East. If you go farther into Iraq and Iran, you get Zoroastrians, and you get some of the remnants of ancient religious groups that still worship Bel and Marduk, and you think about all the diversity of religious experiences even into the present day. So it's just a different experience culturally, linguistically, and I think that impacts the theology. All these elements. I mean, obviously halakha, there's commonality, the same prayers, but there are other prayers that are different. The Ashkenazim include a lot of memorial prayers for certain events that happen. Sephardic Jews have a lot of piyutim. There's different styles because of some of the influences from the greater society. Somebody said, Tovia said the difference is Ashkenaz only know paprika as a spice. And then someone said, oh, it says, well, thank you for the compliment. And then there was something else before that, something about Texas. Eduardo Rojas, it was Bereshit Rabbah. Let's go back there real quick. This is Bereshit Rabbah 11:8. So, and you can find that one on Sepharia, that particular edition. And it says here, see, I'm looking for something. I missed the one about Texas. Something here, thank you. There was one about Texas. I don't know what happened to it, but I don't know if there are any other questions or comments, complaints. It says, I was curious why the Sephardic pronunciation is closer to the Masoretic text pronunciation than Ashkenazim. I would actually argue that that's not the case. I would say that both Ashkenazim and Sephardim have ancient traditions. In many ways, Sephardim are generally influenced more by the Babylonian tradition, where, of course, the great yeshivot and the Babylonian Talmud was written or compiled. Ashkenazim are said to have a Palestinian tradition or a tradition from the land of Israel. It's not exclusive to them. It's just that you have to remember that even in the land of Israel, there are different elements in play. So I think they're both ancient, and that's why there's a divergence in in some of the consonants, of course, and then some of the vocalization. So I wouldn't say that it's closer to the Masoretic text. They both have the Masoretic text. It's just they have a different tradition. And of course, you have groups like Yemenite Jews that have more of an Arabic influence. Yeah, I don't want to get into all the details of all these different groups, but I think they represent legitimate traditions that are based in different regions of the land of Israel and also stem from different times in development. For example, Mishneh Hebrew is now thought by some scholars to have been an actual dialect in the Galilee. And it wasn't simply a linguistic, a language that was used in a literary form, but also, if you will, in conversation. And then Milton says that Sephardic pronunciation was given at Har Sinai. Well, you and I know that, but I can't say those kind of things online. But we have to keep it politically correct. See some of the comments. Somebody says Ashkenazi representing something elite in some way, a bit religious thing, a type of purity. Yeah, I don't know that I would want to say that. I would say that you can find those elements in all communities. Many Sephardic communities are very elitist. I don't know, I don't really talk about my background, but my doctorate in Jewish studies was focused on Sephardic history. And if I have done a tremendous amount of study in this area, and I can tell you that without question, Sephardim have had elements of elitism just as well. We don't necessarily portray that today because, we're in a different demographic reality than we were during the medieval period or even in the modern period. One example is the community in Amsterdam, the historic community that was founded by former conversos or former Anusim or B'nai Anusim. And there were many issues that they had with respect to Ashkenazic Jewry that began to move in. And for a great deal of time, the Sephardic community was dominant in terms of prestige and money and influence. And then as things changed, the Ashkenazic community began to grow. and I wouldn't say the fortunes waned of the Spanish and Portuguese community, but there was just numerically speaking, there were a lot of Ashkenazic Jewry moving into that region of Northern Europe. And you can find that in any case. I mean, if you look at countries in Latin America, where there are significant Syrian communities, for example, they are often what you would think, what you characterize as elitist, whoever that was, I don't know. But you can find that in any community. And that's an unfortunate truth, but that's something for another discussion. And then Milton says the Mexican Jewish historian Irving Gattel told during a lecture that some Ashkenazic Mekubalim explained that the Ashkenazim changed some pronunciation of letters, Tadasa, because the Galut, we shouldn't use the biblical pronunciation of letters. I think that might be a Kabbalistic explanation. I don't think it's a linguistic explanation. I think there's a linguistic reason for it. And I think you can find it within elements of you can see some of these elements in different Jewish groups in the region, in the Levant and in Arabia and so forth. You can see different influences at play. And then Tovia says that's more influenced by Yiddish. Of course, that's a strong element. And you also have to think about, in the case of Jews in Spain and in Portugal, or what we generally call Spain and Portugal, Spanish itself, what we know as Spanish today, has 4,000 Arabic loanwords. So you can see how profound Arabic linguistically has impacted Spanish. And then, of course, by extension, that element, of course, impacted the Jewish community. And then when many Jews moved to the Ottoman Empire, Turkish society, Turkish culture was also a point of influence. So this is the case with any Jewish community in any part of the world. Scott, okay. So I don't know if there's any other questions or comments. I can do maybe one or two more, and then I probably have to head off here to take care of those two that came in.
Something that probably could be interesting for you, Rabbi, is that Rabbi Eliezer Papo, the modern Rabbi, not the author of the Peleioets, he was explaining in a lecture that the 4 Sephardic synagogues in Jerusalem are 4 because they disagreed in the Sephardic pronunciation between the communities, because the Turkish community had a more European pronunciation of the letter Haf and the letter Kof compared with the Ottoman community that was closer to the Arabic pronunciation.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it.
So 2 communities, 4 synagogues.
Well, Tovia, I think I'll hand it back to you if you want to make some last comments.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Juan. Thank you for attending, folks. Saturday night, just as a reminder, this Saturday night, if you're interested, we're having a Zoom room, same Zoom ID number. We'll use it again on dreams and spiritual phenomena. It's not a lecture. It's people like you, me, everyone taking the microphone and sharing any interesting dreams or spiritual phenomena we've encountered, had in our lives, and discussing some discussion around the spiritual nature, connections, or meaning of things. We've done it twice before. We're doing this annually, and we might do it more. That's this Saturday night, and more Zoom rooms to come during the month. We have one on meditation, if you're not familiar. We have one for women, Neshot Bina, and others. So, and as we get closer to Purim, of course, and Pesach, we'll be doing things around those too. So trying to help people online, like Rabbi Juan said, that don't have a community perhaps, or even if you do, to have a way to join together, ask questions, learn, all good stuff. So tell your friends. And in the Torah Fundamentals group is where we're going to be posting announcements for any and all different groups and rooms and everything we do. So it'll all be in that particular group, Torah Fundamentals, where we will have all our announcements going forward. So thank you again, Rabbi Juan. This is awesome. I hope you can come back again next month. Today, by the way, nice present. Today's my birthday. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. Yes, I'm one of those great Aquarians. Thank you for this nice presentation on my birthday. Capped it off. And I'm going to go back to my cats and dogs and my bottle of wine. And have a nice. How young am I? Yeah, how young am I? Happy birthday song to me, right? All right. Thank you all very much. Join the group, ask questions. If you have follow-up questions, that's what the groups are for. So Fundamentals, where we entertain comments and questions for Rabbi Juan, as well as my wife does some groups, some rooms, Elisheva, as well as anything related to the Parsha, the Parashot, the weekly Parsha. We're entertaining questions, studies, lessons, etc. around that too. So that's what it is right now for now in that group and announcements. So thank you all again. See you soon. Shalom. Bye-bye. Laila Tov. Adios.